Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk, exploring the issues affecting all of our lives. I'm your host, Austin Harris. Today we return to Parliament for a review of the activities surrounding the third meeting of the 2021-2022 session. We will explore some of the definitions of terms like PQs and private members' motions for the further edification of our viewers, and then we will consider the two motions brought by the opposition together with the business of Parliament thus far. To better enable us to have this conversation, it is our pleasure to welcome our guest, who is the former Deputy Leader of the Opposition and MP for Newlands, Mr Alva Suckoo. Al, thank you for being with us here on Let's Talk.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been following the show. It's looking really good. You're having some interesting topics, so I'm looking forward to our chat together.
Well, so are we, and again, thank you for being with us as we engage in discussions on Parliament, which of course is now in session. It is customary here on Let's Talk for a bit of get to know you before we get into the meat of our discussion. So let's talk about Alva Suckoo, your background. I mentioned you were the former Deputy Opposition Leader, you were MP for Newlands. Talk to us about your past work and in particular also what you're doing now, because I understand there's a bit of fantastic news with regards to a law career. Talk to us, Al.
Well, I think most people would know that I served 8 years in the Parliament. First 4 years as the fourth elected member for Panton and then MP for Newlands, the last 4 years. Prior to that, obviously, I worked in financial services, mostly in IT. But while I was in Parliament, I started studying law. I did that out of necessity because I was a lawmaker and I needed to understand more about the process and, for my personal edification. But it caught on and I continued and I've just finished my LLB degree, and unofficially, I should get notification today, I think, that I managed to get a first class LLB. So I'm feeling pretty proud of myself today.
Well, we know it certainly wasn't easy to attain, so let me be not the first, but certainly the first on air here at Let's Talk to congratulate you on that accomplishment.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's talk about the Parliament. Today, obviously, we want to engage the Parliament session, presently in session, meetings in session. It's the third meeting of the 2021-2022 session itself. Remarkably, well, first of all, this is the first meeting since the budget meeting back in November 2021. So some 7 months have passed since that budget meeting. Remarkably, very little of consequence was conducted in the first day. No new, per se, government motions. I think it was the comment of the Honourable Deputy Premier who said they were building on foundations they did not lay. Talk to us, I think, first about what has to be the unprecedented speed in which the first day of Parliament actually started and concluded.
Well, I didn't watch the entire session, but I was a bit surprised when I saw them wrapping up at 3 p.m. And you're right, there were some bills brought, but they were, in my mind, there were some housekeeping bills, nothing of major significance. What I really expected to see would have been the government slam their new policies down in the Parliament in the form of bills and motions coming from their side. But what I saw was, two of the bills were from the Honourable Attorney General, and more housekeeping type things, which surprised me, given that, it's been a year now. And I think the general public is expecting to hear what their policies will be going forward throughout this term.
Indeed, indeed. Well, again, given that it was 7 months from the budget address to this meeting, we have no idea how long it will be in between now and the next meeting. And to your point, still waiting to see what the government plans to complete in their term in office, which you and I both know 4 years goes by very quickly.
Very quickly. And for the most part, I really thought about it and I said, well, this is a government that was put together after the election. They didn't campaign on a common platform. So I think they're probably still shifting through the policies and so on to say, well, what can we do what can be pushed, what can we give priority to. I know we have the, the budget and the strategic policy statement that outlines at a high level what they plan to do, but there has to be some discussions going on as to what gets priority now. But one thing that I thought was missing was the all the environmental work that I see that is being prepared. I would have liked to have seen a bit more meat come forward on that front.
Quite right indeed. And certainly in the environment and climate control, these were, climate change rather, these were issues that were important to you when you were certainly in office for those 8 years. We want to transition to the actual work of Parliament now. Whilst again, very little of consequence came from the government, today in Parliament, Private Members' Motions Day, PQ Day, these are private members' motions. There are 2 private members' motions being brought by the opposition, which we want to talk about. But for the edification of our listening audience, particularly our younger viewers who may not know what we talk about when we say private members' motions, maybe you can briefly define that term.
Well, a private member's motion, and a lot of people confuse private members with opposition. Private members' day is really for anyone who's not a minister. So that's the day that private members can bring their motions and their questions. A private member's motion then is a request from an individual member asking the government to consider doing something. So it doesn't have to be part of the government's policy. It doesn't have to be part of their plan. It could be a member of the government backbench that brings it, or a member of the opposition. But it asks them to consider doing something. The other thing is, what I've learned through my experience is that people assume that as a private member's motion gets approved or passed, that it's law and it's set. And that's really not how it works. The government then has to go away and consider how to do it, if they plan to do it at all, because there are often times that the government will vote for it, but it doesn't materialize. And that's part of politics. Right. But the opposition must have its say. So opposition will bring private members' motions asking the government to consider doing something. Then it's up to the government whether or not they're going to implement that.
Indeed, thanks. Well, certainly the opposition intends to bring, or has brought, 2 private members' motions, and we want to go through them with you and of course the listening audience, which I'm going to read each motion and then we'll chat about it briefly. The first is private members' motion number 4. This is a motion to increase assistance to Caymanian home buyers. And again, a bit of background: we've provided stamp duty concessions for first-time Caymanian home buyers, and with the market the way it is, certainly the rising costs of housing, both in terms of buying land as well as those who are paying rent today, the opposition believes this is the kind of initiative that will assist our people in real terms. But let's read it. Be it therefore resolved that the government consider, as a matter of urgency, amending the Stamp Duty Act as follows. For first-time Caymanian property and home buyers, A, 0% duty on land only with a value up to $200,000, and for houses, apartments, and other dwelling purchases with a market value of up to $500,000 for owner occupation. And B, 2% duty on the value above $200,000 on land purchases, and for houses, apartments, and other dwellings purchased for owner occupation on the value above $500,000. C, in cases where the property is transferred to 2 or not more than 10 persons who are first-time Caymanian homeowners, 0% duty for bare land purchases with a market value of up to $350,000, houses and apartments, or other dwelling purchases with a market value of up to $600,000 for owner occupation, and 2% duty on the value above $350,000 on raw land purchases, and for houses, apartments, or other dwellings purchased for owner occupation on the value above $600,000. And finally, a 5% stamp duty for Caymanian persons only, and this relates to property purchased by a Caymanian that does not fall into the first-time Caymanian property home buyer scheme. This motion will be brought by the MP for Georgetown West, Mr. David White, and will be seconded by the elected member for Georgetown South, Miss Barbara Connolly. Again, I think this is the kind of initiative that provides direct savings and benefit to our people at a time when they need it the most. Your thoughts on this private member's motion and the likelihood that the government may choose to accept it?
Well, overall, this motion not only addresses just the ongoing concern of Caymanian home ownership, but it also touches on some very important points that I think people need to recognize, is that we're subject to fiscal policy that is made in the United States. Interest rates, we have no control over interest rates. Things like that are actually impacting Caymanians. And they feel it in their pocket. But there's also the ongoing issue of who are we developing for?
Yes.
And this motion addresses that as well, because it is providing incentives in a sort of a roundabout way to Caymanians to go out and develop. So when you get a motion like this, it's going to be very difficult for the government to say no. But again, you can go back to this, we will accept the motion and consider it.
Yeah.
But I think that this motion provides some real solutions. And I hear a lot of Caymanians, young Caymanians, complaining that they're locked out of the property market.
Yes.
They don't see an opportunity for home ownership or to build apartments as an investment. So, this is something that the government should seriously consider. And it's a response to the ongoing economic situation that we have here. When you consider what the economic impact of this would be, if suddenly younger Caymanians can find it more affordable to develop and inject money into the economy through their development, then it's a win-win for everyone. So suffer a little bit now and reduce the surplus, but put this in place and young Caymanians will benefit and future generations will benefit.
Quite right, indeed. And again, as you point out, it'd be very difficult for the government to choose not to accept this motion, but it remains to be seen. Just a side note, we talk about the rising cost of housing, the rising inflation. There's an old Bob Marley song, "He who feels it knows it."
Yeah.
And recently, the Economic and Statistics Office came out with the Cayman Islands Consumer Price Index for the first quarter of 2022, from January to March 2022. And again, this is, I'm sure, won't be news to the listening audience, but it seeks to, I think, validate what the private member's motion seeks to accomplish. We've seen the Consumer Price Index increase. Cost of living has increased to 11.5%. What is driving this is housing and utility costs. Let's see, the housing and utilities, reading directly from the Consumer Price Index report, housing and utilities showed a 20.1% increase, as the cost of electricity has increased by 35%. The cost of water supply rose by 25.3%. We see rents increasing by as much as 12.3%. Obviously, all of these factors impact housing and, of course, the ability for Caymanians to access either a home of their own, and particularly those also who are renting. Challenges are all around.
Yes, and it's for a young Caymanian in particular who has just come into the job market, finally making some money. It's a bit daunting for them to not be able to say, I can develop my own property, I can own some land. We have limited land, so the cost is only going to go up, the price is only going to go up. But then, we also have to consider the impact of this on the average Caymanian who is earning a minimum wage. When you have to work an hour now to buy a gallon of gas, that's reality for you.
Yes.
1 hour of your labor to get a gallon of gasoline or a gallon of milk.
It's a shocking reality, to say the least.
It is. And, Caymanians are suffering. Many suffer in silence. But overall, there is this sort of depression that's set in on our economy, and this is one of the ways that I think it can be shifted.
Indeed. Speaking of shocking, we heard from the Honourable Premier, Honourable Wayne Panton, at the recent Royal Fidelity Conference. He, in fact, spoke to this ESO Consumer Price Index report. But interestingly, again, when we talked about the unprecedented speed of the first day on government motion day, where there was an absence of government motions, new motions, there was an absence of firming up their own bills based on the budget itself. But this report could have been tabled, should have been tabled on that first day, and it wasn't. I'm not quite sure whether it was discussed today on Thursday, but talk to us about choosing not to table such a very important report from on the Consumer Price Index in Parliament.
Well, I think it should have been tabled. While the news is not great, we talk about transparency, and tabling these reports in Parliament makes them public information. So anyone can then have access to it. And Parliament is the gatekeeper for democracy. And if you operate a transparent government, things like this, you don't just share the good news, you share the bad news as well. I don't know if I wouldn't say it was deliberately done. Maybe it was overlooked.
Yes.
However, this report, every Caymanian, every person living here should be reading this right now.
Absolutely.
It's important.
Indeed, and again, this report is available at the Economic and Statistics Office website. I think it's eso.ky. The second private member's motion number 3, I think less impactful on young Caymanians' opportunities, less mindful of the inflation, but certainly I think equally as important, particularly to our tourism package, which of course we're starting to reopen now, as well as of course socializing for citizens. It is a motion seeking to allow background music in bars on Sundays, and again, for completeness, I will read it and ask for your feedback and comment. Be it therefore resolved that the government consider amending the Music and Dancing Control Act to include licensed bars as premises that are allowed to play background music to be enjoyed by patrons on a Sunday, provided the music should not be heard outside the boundary of the establishment. And this private member's motion is being brought by the elected member for Red Bay, Sir Aldon McLaughlin, MP, and seconded by the elected member for Georgetown South, Miss Barbara Connolly. Again, a motion seeking to assist local Caymanian small business operators to improve their business and to get them back up to pre-pandemic levels. Your thoughts and feedback on this, and again, the expectation that government may or may not choose to accept it. Your thoughts?
Well, again, it's a very important motion. On the surface, one could tend to sort of overlook it and say, oh, this is just background music. But when you think about the announcement recently that 50% of our stayover tourism has returned, and on Sundays, I would suspect that majority of those stayover tourists who want to go out and enjoy themselves are going to premises where there's background music, there's music being played. Our local entrepreneurs are definitely getting shortchanged. So it's important. It's important, not just from that perspective, but also the perspective that the law should be equal for everyone.
Yes.
And if you have some establishments getting favored by the law, then that needs to be addressed. But overall, this is a nice boost.
Indeed. I also thought when I was reading this motion that, going back to the budget, November 2021, the Honorable Minister of Finance insisted that it was a people-driven budget. And I think this motion, as with the one before, are people-driven. It deals with our local people, their businesses, and of course their ability to earn. So it fits in line with what one would say is government policy.
And I would venture to say that those members of the government who would go out and socialize on a Sunday would be at these small establishments.
True.
Most of them are owned by their constituents.
Yes.
So they're going to be at those, just look out for the small man too.
Absolutely, absolutely. Finally, there are some 15 PQs that will be heard by Parliament today on the order paper. We don't have time to engage in all 15 of them, but I pulled out a sampling of some 6 that we may discuss here if we have time. But before we get to the questions, again, for the edification of our listening audience, when we use the term PQs, what do we mean?
Well, it's a parliamentary question. So it's normally it's a question put to a member of the executive. Could be a minister, the premier, deputy premier, or one of the ex officio members as well. But it's either a request for information, or it can be used as a tool to push for a change.
Yes.
So in asking the question, you highlight an issue, and then if the speaker allows follow-up, you may ask the government would they commit to doing something about this. So it's one of the tools in the arsenal of mainly the opposition, but anyone can ask questions, and it happens in the House that members of the government will ask questions as well. Government members can use it as well to showcase. So if you're a minister, you could ask one of your backbench members to ask a question about this,
Yes.
because I want to talk about this.
Right.
So it's a tool that can be used by both sides. But from the opposition perspective, it is mainly seeking information and pushing for a commitment to do something.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Again, we don't have time to read all 15 of them, but we do have a sampling of some of the questions. We're going to begin with question number 1. It asks, can the Honourable Minister confirm whether he is still considering pursuing the government taking up a $400 million 30-year bullet bond or any type of bullet bond? And if so, does this have the approval of the Cabinet and the UK? Obviously speaking, the question is being directed to the Minister of Finance, going back to the proposed bullet bond, which the opposition has stated since it was first announced that this is a bad idea. There's no need for this level of borrowing. There's no need to indebt future generations of Caymanians at this time. We haven't heard much in terms of this bullet bond, but again, your thoughts on this question?
I think it's a timely question, especially with announcements about the economic situation. What are we going to do if the government has a need for financing, for extra capital? But we haven't heard very much about this since the announcement. So it is a timely question, and it's an important question.
Yes, indeed. Questions number 3, 4, and 6 are education related, and we know that the subject of education crosses both party lines. It's important to everyone. Question number 3 asks the Minister of Education, can the Honourable Minister provide an update on the timetable for the introduction of the new Cayman Islands national curriculum to cover students at all levels in Cayman's public schools? Now, this relates to an initiative that I think began in 2019, a working group created by the Minister of Education that sought to enhance the national curriculum, specifically to include things like critical thinking, inquiry, and reasoning in the national curriculum. This is to address, of course, the changing world that is outside of school and to better prepare Cayman's next generation. Certainly a worthy initiative, but again, your thoughts on this?
Well, and there's been, from quite some time now, there's been talk about education reform. There have been critics of our education system, people who have said that we need to improve it. Our kids are not prepared for the real world when they come out of school. So this question is very important, because what we need to know is what the plans are for our kids' education, the future of this country. And is the curriculum going to be upgraded to compensate for some of the deficiencies that have been pointed out by these various reports? So again, very timely question, very important.
Indeed. Question number 4, sticking with education, but looking at the early years, which of course, people think of education at primary school and high school, but we have to remember that learning begins a lot earlier than that. Question number 4 asks, again, of the Honourable Minister of Education, can the Honourable Minister provide an update on the implementation of her plans to improve and extend early years education provision? Again, this was another initiative under the previous administration that sought to introduce appropriate practices and activities for I think it was the infant, toddler, as well as the young child during various stages of their development. And again, education begins from as early as being an infant. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I remember this being an issue when I was in office, and a concern, because early year education obviously cascades into how a student does in the future. And there were deficiencies pointed out in some of the inspection reports, some of the reports that went back to government. So, and I know that the former administration had plans to address it. So yeah, I would be interested to see what the plans are now, because those issues I think would have been magnified now, given the fact that we were homeschooling so much.
Yes.
And some kids didn't get to start school on time because of the pandemic. So Again, another very important question to ask.
Well, I think it's interesting that you obviously referred to the homeschooling, what occurred during the lockdown, and students learning online. Question number 6 follows this line of thinking, where it asks, can the Honourable Minister state what action she has taken or plans she has made in light of the serious concerns raised by the Office of Education Standards that students across the public school system experience learning loss caused by interruptions to their education as a result of the various pandemic restrictions. Now, obviously, this relates to the early COVID lockdown that we experienced. Students obviously taken out of school, online learning at home. There were a number of challenges that students and parents faced in this. The Office of Education Standards did a number of visits shortly after that lockdown and discovered that there were learning losses in the core subjects of English, math, and science.
Yes.
Now, I just want to point out that COVID, was a surprise and a learning lesson for all of us. I don't think this is a challenge on the government or any government, but particularly to this issue of learning loss. It could represent a global phenomenon. We're hearing about it in the US as well as much of Europe. And there's a train of thought going that students learn better in a classroom setting versus in an online world. And these learning losses that are experienced in Cayman have also been felt across the globe. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a global issue. Just about every country has been impacted by COVID. What I'm most concerned about is that I don't think the solution will be just to tag on some days at the end of the year. I think that these kids have matured, they've developed while experiencing this learning loss. So there's a lot of psychological factors that have to be considered as well. But the government has to become creative now because we have to fill those gaps. We can't just write off, the past 2 years and say to those students, well, you're going forward with a learning loss. So I think solutions like providing an enhanced level of counseling in the schools, enhanced level of tutoring, maybe consider some summer school classes, things like that. But don't make it so rigid that the kids don't like it. Make it enjoyable, and in doing that, they will embrace it more than reject it. Because no child wants to hear, but I have to go to school during the summer.
Yes.
But maybe incorporate into some of the summer camps, things like that, because we have to address those gaps and we have to do it quickly because we're going to shortchange, these past 2 years of students that, from moving forward and achieving their best.
Indeed. And I thank you for, certainly the recommendations as to, how do we improve it as well. Again, I think those are all very valuable. The final 2 questions, 7 and 8, address some of the controversies that have certainly taken place in the past 12 months or so. Question number 7, this is to the Deputy Governor. It says whether an investigation is underway regarding the leak of the Office of Auditor General's report on the overseas offices and the Dubai World Expo, and if so, when does he anticipate that it will be concluded and the public updated accordingly? And of course, as a follow-on B, if the investigation is not started, why not? And is the government committed to completing an investigation into this matter? Again, our viewers may remember there was an allegation made by the Auditor General's office that the attendance, that the previous administration committed the next administration to both attend the Dubai World Expo and also committed them to opening certain overseas offices. And the Auditor General asserted that the previous administration acted in breach of both the Constitution and the Public Management and Finance Law. In doing so, an independent investigation was done on this by the Deputy Governor's office and found that the Auditor General was in fact incorrect and that the previous administration committed no breach whatsoever. Again, we heard a lot about this subject when the report was first leaked, but it's somewhat gone silent now. Again, your thoughts on the importance of the follow-up to this?
Well, it is important. You can't think of the trouble this whole fiasco has caused, and it's put some senior civil servants under intense stress, and I'm speaking nicely.
Yes.
But I think that there has to be an investigation. You can't have a government, you can't have an organization where someone is leaking information to cause trouble. And that is what has transpired. So there has to be an investigation and it has to be concluded.
Indeed. Sticking with accountability, the final question, question 8, goes back to an issue of missing topsoil. It asks, I think, 3 questions. This is to the Honourable Minister to the Minister responsible for the portfolio of the Civil Service. It says, please provide the facts regarding the topsoil or fill that was the property of the National Housing Development Trust, allegedly being disposed of without proper process being followed. Please advise whether an investigation into this matter has started, and if so, when will it likely be concluded? And C, assure the House that the report on the investigation will be made public as soon as the investigation is completed. This is, again, a question of accountability. Topsoil or fill that was planned for a National Housing Development project somehow went missing. Your thoughts?
No, you're right. It's accountability and transparency as well. If there's an allegation of wrongdoing, it has to be brought to a conclusion. It can't just be left hanging. And it's concerning, while it might seem like it's not a big deal, if people start to detect that this practice is tolerated throughout the government, then other loads of fill will disappear, or other assets will disappear. And in time, it's going to impact the average Caymanian's pocket, because these things are assets that belong to the government, that are paid for with our tax money.
Yes.
So,
Indeed.
you know, that's how far this one goes. So it might seem like not a big deal, but it is a big deal. And again, you know, I hope that there is an investigation ongoing that will be quickly brought to the public.
All right. Well, Al, we've run out of time. I want to thank you very much for being our guest. I think the information you shared has been invaluable and educational to our viewers. An opportunity for any closing or final remarks?
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more from the government on the plans, especially given the challenges we face now. I have always said to the people that I'm not here to criticize and you know, just for the sake of criticism. I'm here to encourage. And I hope that my comments will be taken in that light, that, you know, I think I still have some advice that I can offer that might be useful, even though I'm not in office anymore. But I still feel I have a responsibility to the country, and you'll always feel that when you've been in office, to contribute positively. And so I encourage the government. I hope that they do well. I hope they do well for this country. But, you know, I think that the country now needs to hear more on what their plans are for the future.
Indeed. Again, Al, thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to having you back here in studios with us for more Let's Talk. And again, to our audiences, we hope you have enjoyed today's conversation. Hope you found it educational and informative. If you did, remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, remember, please tune in every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. for more Let's Talk, exploring the issues affecting all of our lives. I'm your host, Austin Harris. Until next time.